welcome back to the Ask Ralph Show, where we tackle your financial questions from a place of faith. I'm your host, Ralph, and I'm thrilled you're tuning in today. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking about taxes. Anyone else? Or just me? Okay, well, even if you don't share my intense relationship with the IRS, today's topic is one that can bring you peace of mind for every taxpayer. We're diving deep into a question I get asked all the time, and that's this question. Hey Ralph, just how far back can the IRS go when auditing returns? Well, stick around because knowing the answer could save you from a whole lot of unnecessary worry. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of IRS time limits, let's take a quick look and stroll down memory lane. Yesterday, we explored some fantastic alternatives to personal loans. We talked about everything from credit unions to peer-to-peer lending, all with the goal of helping you find the most financially responsible path forward. If you missed it, don't sweat it. Just scoot back one episode and give it a listen. And make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single episode. Tomorrow, we're diving into a topic that can be tricky both financially and emotionally. And that's, what do you do when you inherit property with someone else? Believe me, I've been through this. You want to be prepared for that conversation. Now, friends, before we get down to business, let's take a moment to center ourselves in Scripture. Today's verse comes from the book of Proverbs, chapter 11, verse 1, and it reads this: "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find his favor." This verse reminds us that honesty and integrity are paramount, especially when it comes to our finances. God sees everything, and he calls us to be above reproach in our dealings, and that includes, that's right, you guessed it, our taxes. All right, well, let's talk taxes. Specifically, let's talk about the IRS and those dreaded audits. Now, I know the word audit sends shivers down many a spine, but understanding how long the IRS has to audit your return can actually be quite empowering. As I always say, knowledge is power. Here's the general rule of thumb. The IRS typically has 3 years from the date you filed your tax return to initiate an audit. So if you filed your 2023 taxes on April 15, 2024, the IRS generally has until April 15, 2027 to come knocking at the door. Trust me, that's a visitor you don't want to see at your door. 3 years, that's it, you might be thinking? Well, yes and no. There are some important exceptions to this rule. It's always those exceptions that get you. Grandfather told me that. So let's talk about those exceptions. Now, the first exception is this, and that's called substantial understatement of income. And you ask, Ralph, what does that even mean? If the IRS suspects you significantly underreported your income, we're talking about 25% or more, they expand that to 6 years to audit your return. This is where meticulous record keeping becomes your best friend. Keep those receipts. If you learn nothing else from today's show, make sure you keep all your records and make sure they're organized and safe at the very moment you file a return. Most people don't know this, but technically, you're supposed to have all your receipt evidence ready and assembled before you file your return. Let's look at exception number 2, and that's fraud or intentional misrepresentation. Again, you ask, Ralph, what does that really mean? Now, this is serious stuff. If the IRS believes you intentionally tried to cheat the system, there is no time limit on when they can audit you. That's right. They can go back decades if they have to. Yep, decades. And the honest truth is, if they see something in a particular tax year, they're generally going to take a look backward at your returns to see if you did that same thing in the past. So let's all agree to play by the rules, shall we? Let's move on to the final exception, and that's number 3, unfiled tax return. Those returns you just kind of forgot to file. If you haven't filed a tax return at all, the clock never starts ticking. The IRS can come after you for unpaid taxes indefinitely. Yes, you heard me right. If you don't file, they can come after you for as long as they wish. So if you've been putting off filing for whatever reason, now's the time to bite the bullet and get those returns submitted. It amazes me just how many of my new clients will come into my office assuming that, well, since they didn't file, they didn't get a letter from the IRS, they're fine. They're somehow out of the woods, but they're wrong. So get those unfiled returns done now and stay out of the IRS hot water. I know this talk about audits can be a bit overwhelming, so let me offer some words of reassurance. The vast majority of taxpayers will never experience an IRS audit. In fact, the IRS audits less than 1% of individual tax returns each year. However, and this is a big however, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be prepared. So here are a few actionable steps you can take to minimize your audit risk and face any potential scrutiny with confidence. These are my get out of the hot water with the IRS steps. And the first actionable step is this: file on time every time. Now this one seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many people fall behind on their filing of their taxes. Filing on time shows the IRS you're on top of your financial game. I have many clients who I only see every few years. They simply put off their filings. When I first started, I couldn't believe this. And then they get caught up down the road. I'm actually working right now with a client who hasn't filed since 2014, as best we can tell. And it's going to be an interesting case, especially since the client can't find most of the records for those missed filings. It's going to be interesting. I'll let you know how that plays out. Well, let's look at actionable step number 2. And that's double check your work. Again, I'm going to quote my grandfather. He'd always say, measure twice and cut once. In fact, I remember working in that wood shop where it seemed like we would measure 10 times before we were cutting. He was a very wise man. Truth is, though, mistakes happen, but careless errors can and often will raise those red flags. So before you hit submit, review your return carefully, or better yet, have a tax professional give it a once-over. As a tax professional, I always recommend having someone like me prepare your taxes. When you're sick, you go to a doctor. When your pipes burst, you seek out a plumber. So when it comes to taxes, why not seek out an expert and avoid all that mess? Let's look at actionable step number 3. I already talked about this a little bit earlier, and that's keep meticulous records. I can't stress this enough. Keep receipts, keep invoices, keep bank statements, keep anything and everything that can support the information on your tax return. Organized records are your best defense in the event of an audit. And my final actionable step, number 4, don't be afraid to seek professional help. I mean it. Don't handle an audit on your own, and I dare to say don't do your taxes on your own. Taxes can be complicated, and there's no shame in asking for help. A qualified tax professional can help you navigate the complexities of the tax code and absolutely ensure you're claiming all the deductions and the credits you're entitled to. Remember, friends, being financially responsible is not just good practice, it's also a reflection of our faith. When we manage our finances with integrity, we honor God and position ourselves for His blessings. It also allows us to rest our heads on the pillow at night without worrying about getting that dreaded IRS audit notice. All right, well, let's recap what we covered today. We learned that the IRS generally has 3 years to audit your tax returns, but the time frame can be extended to 6 years or even indefinitely under certain circumstances. We also discussed some practical steps you can take. I want to give you things you can do to minimize your audit risk, like filing on time, double checking your work, keeping meticulous record, and seeking that professional help when it's needed. Remember, knowledge is power, and understanding your tax obligations is crucial for achieving true financial freedom. And hey, if you've got a burning financial question you'd like me to tackle on the show, don't be shy. Head over to AskRalphPodcast.com and submit your questions. You just might hear it featured on an upcoming episode. This is your show, and the topics we cover are based on your questions and ideas. That's the whole point. Ask Ralph. That's all the time we have for today. Remember to check out tomorrow's episode on navigating the potentially choppy waters of inheriting property with somebody else. Until then, my friends, stay financially savvy, and God bless you, and stay out of hot water with the IRS.
Thank you for joining us on the Ask Ralph podcast. And with a simple click to subscribe, we'll invite you back to our next episode. And remember, financial issues don't have to be complicated. Just ask Ralph. The information contained in this episode of Ask Ralph is based on data available as of the date of its release. Saggio Accounting Plus and Ask Ralph Media, Inc. is under no obligation to update this content if changes occur. Applying this information to your specific situation requires careful consideration of all facts and circumstances, and any information provided is not to be considered as financial, tax, or legal advice. Please consult your tax advisor or attorney before acting on any material covered.